So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kane, who is going to talk to us about pausing and resuming fabric capacities. So thank you, Kane. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. Let me share my screen, and thanks everyone for joining the session. It's actually the first time I've done this session, so appreciate any feedback. And I haven't timed it yet, so I'm kind of winging it. We'll see how we go for time. So you guys are my guinea pigs. Maybe go easy on me.
Yeah, no, it's all good, and I've done my yoga, so you can take as long or as short as you need.
Awesome. Yeah, so looking at pausing and resuming fabric capacities, but more specifically, how can we automate it for different solutions? So just a little bit about me. I'm business intelligence lead at Agile Insights. We actually just rebranded from Agile Analytics. So I lead a team of consultants there in the Power BI practice. I've been focused 100% on Power BI for the last 5 years, but more recently now on Fabric. I'm a total Power BI nerd, so I guess I've had quite a rapid career in Power BI. I'm quite passionate about helping people accelerate their Power BI careers. So I had sort of no data skills whatsoever. I couldn't really even find my way around an Excel spreadsheet, and then I got my first senior consulting role after a year and a half of making the jump into data. And then I made principal consultant in less than a year from there. And then basically in 4 years, I went from no skills to this lead role. My background's not in IT, it's actually in sales and management and business, which it's actually been one of my, I guess, been one of my biggest assets in the consulting world. So if you're interested in consulting, can't recommend enough to understand business and how to talk to business people.
Mm-hmm.
I love pushing the boundaries in Power BI, so particularly around advanced kind of interactivity and report design. People kind of know me for calculation groups because I did some work there and presented on it for a while, but that's only kind of one of my interests. I'm interested in lots of things in Power BI and lots of different passion areas. But yeah, I've done some user groups, live streams, I've done blog posts and had them featured, and yeah, that's it about me. Get away from the boring stuff and get into the presentation.
Only featured in SQLBI, the #1 place to have it featured, I think, for technical content.
Yeah, I am quite proud of that.
And Kane's blog is 10 Little Fingers, so if you ever see anything written by him, that's his blog post.
Yep, exactly right. Yeah, I'll share this deck after the session, and there's links here to my blog and Twitter and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All right, so what are we looking at? So firstly, this session, it does have some stuff in Azure and different things that might sort of more traditionally be, data engineering kind of stuff, but it's pretty straightforward. And my aim is to show, it's Power BI. I'm a Power BI guy. My aim is to show how easy it is to kind of do some of these things and create sort of more simple solutions. So it's not, relatively complex. It's not super advanced. I hope that it's sort of things that anyone that's using Power BI could tackle. And it kind of addresses like a really specific business scenario that I see quite a lot. At the end of the presentation, I look at some other scenarios, but the solution that we use to kind of talk about this addresses like a specific issue that I see a lot, which is a small to medium business that's been using Power BI, and they often have Power BI connected directly to source systems like ERPs or finance systems, and they're doing all of their transformation in Power Query. They've got this monster model that's supporting all of their reporting, and they have long refreshes and timeouts, and they kind of aren't big enough or don't want to invest in getting like an analytics team in to build them, a modern data platform. And they don't want you to, they're not going to fork out for subscriptions to spin up Azure SQL warehouses and ADF and do end-to-end proper solutions. They're quite sort of happy with their basic things that they're doing, but the next step for them in the journey is definitely to get some kind of data warehousing happening, or just make their solutions a little bit more robust. But they want something low cost.
This is perfect for me. Absolutely perfect. And you were describing, I think, so many businesses that are just not enterprise that have the need for this. So perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I see it all the time, and I think there's a big chunk of businesses that fall in the middle there. There's big businesses that need everything and the full platform, and there's small businesses that are fine with just some Excel extracts and some Power BI and aren't doing much. But there's really solid businesses that can, the value that you can provide with Power BI is really substantial for them, but they don't know what they're doing, and they're having all these problems. So some of the common issues as well that you'll run into, obviously, with Power Query is you can obviously do API connections in Power Query, and you can do pretty complex API connections. But I don't know about you guys, my M code's okay. But if it comes to APIs and like doing things like pagination and continuation URIs and these more complex things, it's pretty tough going. It's not easy. You really got to sweat it out. And I'm not even that confident. If someone said, look, we've got this complex API with pagination you need to connect to, I'd be like, oh, I don't want this project. And then things like type 2 slowly changing dimensions and snapshotting, that's I don't know if any, I think Owen, who's in my team, might have done something close to that, but it's really difficult in Power Query to snapshot fact tables and build like an incremental snapshot is not things. Also, as much as I love Power Query, really, really heavy transformation requirements, they do slow down refresh. And you see that with customers, they have these list of 30 steps that they're doing to some bit of data, and it's great. They've transformed it into a nice clean star schema, but the cost in Power Query is high, and Power Query is super easy with the UI, but the cost is kind of in performance, right? If you need to take a large piece of data and move it through a whole heap of transformations, then you can run into issues, and that's what I put there. Some refresh issues as well. These are common things that you find businesses have with pure Power BI solutions that don't have warehouses or lake houses or anything like that. So this scenario looks at, can we leverage Fabric for some of these businesses to add some of that capability in a low cost way?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah.
All right, so I don't know how long it's been, and look, I hope this isn't too, I do have some demos. I promise this won't all be slides and talking. It's the first presentation I've ever done that doesn't have Power BI desktop in it, but yeah, we will jump into some practical stuff. But yeah, there's an API to pause and resume Fabric capacity. I'm not sure exactly when it dropped, but I became aware of it, and I thought, oh, yeah, I've been wondering about that because I didn't really see the use for PAYG capacities and pausing and resuming because of the fact that you had to manually pause and resume them. I mean, great for testing things out and having your own small capacity, but for a business, you don't really want someone to have to go in and keep tapping pause and resume. So there's some links here, and I'll quickly bring up the page and show you. It's going to let me. No, can't do it in presenter mode. I think I've got it open anyway. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, so I'll just bring this in here. So this is the API that we can use, Fabric Capacity Suspend, and there's one for Resume as well. There's a couple of key things to note here, which will be important later, is the API version and what we need: capacity name, resource group, subscription ID, API version. And there's also the scopes, which is basically like the permissions that we'll need, which is this user impersonation. Don't worry about that now, that'll be important later, but just to give you the basic detail. And there's some blogs out there that are really useful for this stuff too that I leaned on heavily to learn some of this stuff and find out about it. So there's one from Oliver Travers where he looks at using a notebook to pause and resume with this API. There's one from MS SQL Tips, which looks at using ADF to do it. And then there's one from BI Insight, which uses different things in a logic app. So some good resources there if you want to read up further on what other people have written about this.
Brilliant, because they're excellent resources, so thank you.
So the first thing that I thought about with this API was I thought, this is brilliant. We can just make a pipeline in Fabric. We can, notebooks are pretty easy with APIs. We can just call, trigger the API, run our pipeline, trigger the API again, and just start and stop it. But if you think about it, there's an issue with it, which is you can't run a pipeline or notebooks in a capacities that pause. So once your capacity's turned off, you can't just run the pipeline within the capacity to start it up again. You need to start the capacity from somewhere else, basically. So I looked into a bunch of different ways that you can do this, and there is lots of different ways out there. And we'll look at a few different ways. But I thought about it. I thought there's VS Code. All we really need to do is run some code on it in the cloud, basically run some code online. The Python code to do it, or whichever code you want to do it. It's not super complex because all we're doing is just basically passing a URL. So I looked at VS Code online. I found out you could run Python code in Power Automate Desktop. Lots of people recommend different cloud services for running chunks of code online. Even some of the Microsoft documentation recommends Azure Runbooks, which wasn't enabled for my organization, so I didn't look into that much, but it's another option. One of those blogs I mentioned uses ADF to do it. Obviously, if you had two Fabric capacities, you could use one Fabric capacity to trigger the other, but I was thinking, man, there must be an easier way to do this. And so what I settled on is an Azure Logic app. So it's quite a simple option. That's what I want to show today, is how you can do this in a really simple way. So an Azure Logic app is just a very simple way to execute chunks of code. If you've ever used Power Automate, it's quite a similar interface in the app designer that you use. And it's very easy. So I'm going to show you that. There's a couple of things that we need to set up in order to do this. One is we need to set up a service principal. So service principal is basically like an identity application that you can use for authorization. It's pretty easy to set up. We just do that in Azure. And then we need to grant some specific permissions for the service principal, and we need to add it to our Fabric capacity as a contributor role. And then for security, we'll set up a key vault and add some credentials from the service principal to the key vault. So it'll make more sense as we go through it. I'm not going to talk you through all of the steps to do this, but we'll look at it in Azure just so we know what to do. So this is Azure portal. I go to the home. This is if you log into Azure, this is kind of what you'd see. And to set up a service principal, all you would do is go to app registrations, add a new registration, and you would give it a name and basically register it. And it's pretty straightforward. That's all there is to it. If I look at my app registrations, I've got a few that I've created already, and this is the one we're using today. So I created the app registration, and then under this manage section, you have API permissions. And if you remember from the API details, we need this user impersonation. So we need to add that to our identity application or our service principal. So here it is, I've already added, but it's quite easy to add. You just click add permission, the permissions under Azure Service Management, and you just check user permission. Slightly off topic, but there's all these other permissions here that have been added for me. If you do want to look at things like calling REST APIs, Power BI REST APIs from Fabric in a notebook, and you want to, do some admin and governance reporting, which is part of what I've used in the example here, you can add all these Power BI permissions to your identity account. So the Power BI service here has all these read permissions for workspaces and everything like that. All we need though for this solution is the user impersonation added to your service principal. We would also need and then once you've created your service principal, under here you'll see, sorry, I'm jumping around a bit, but in the overview you see we have these credentials here. The ones that are important for us is we have our tenant ID, which is basically the ID for our Fabric Power BI tenant, or our, we have for our overall tenant. And then we have the application ID or client ID, which is identifying this service principal. And then you'll see we have secrets and certificates here under client credentials. When you create a secret, you come in here and you click new secret, and you can only see it once. Once you then navigate away, it goes like this, where you can't see what the secret is. And so if you don't note it down, you've lost it. You have to create a new one. But this is because it's something for security. We need to make sure that these are secret. And so the best way to sort of manage this is to put them in something called a key vault. So copy it, and then we would create a key vault. So I've created a few here. Again, these things are very easy to create. You just click on new key vault and go through the options. But in this key vault, I've got these objects and I've got secrets. And within the secrets, I've added all those credentials from the service principal, the tenant ID, the client ID, and the secret. And the reason I've done that is so that I can then, in our solutions, I can then reference these things, pull them from the key vault without exposing them in the code. So it's just a way to keep them locked away secretly and reference them when you need to, but without actually showing them. All right, so we've set up our key vault. We've saved our secrets and things under the secrets, which is just a matter of clicking new here. You can see here I've got a REST API secret, I've got a logic app secret, a client ID, a tenant ID. So a few different secrets and client IDs and tenant IDs for different things I'm doing. The ones we'll use today, the logic app secret, tenant ID, the logic app trigger, client ID. Just to simplify it and recap, you need a service principal with user impersonation added as a permission from Azure Management. You need a key vault with your tenant ID, client ID, and secret from that service principal saved. And then last but not least, in our Fabric capacity, so this is my F2 Fabric capacity, which is paused. If we look at the access control, we need that service principal to have access to our Fabric capacity, because we're going to use the service principal to pause and resume the capacity. So if I check my access here and search for my name, you'll see that that service principal, Kane PBI APIs, all my service principals have access to this Fabric capacity. So they've been added as a contributor. You need to add them as contributor level to your Fabric capacity. So that is all of the kind of housework and tough stuff that you kind of need to do in Azure. That's the stuff that's we might not be super familiar with, but once you get in here and do it, it's not that hard. Create a service principal. It's really just stepping through some prompts, add the API permissions to the service principal, create a key vault, store your credentials in the key vault, add access to your fabric capacity for the service principal. I'll stop there for a minute. Was there any questions on that? I kind of ran through it quite quickly.
No, it's I mean, I manage a tenant for someone, and I found, I found actually the Azure portal is really quite nice to use. It does, I mean, it sounds a lot when you run through it like that, but actually it's okay, isn't it? It is
It
okay
is.
to actually start to use it, and it's very, it helps you and it prompts you along the way. So I think it sounds scarier than what it actually is, and then to put it as a point by point on the way through, then you can follow that. So it makes sense. We haven't got any questions as such in the chat. We had someone come in that was being, it's the first time ever that was being a little bit, I can't say the word because it's a bit rude. So I've booted them out, and so I'm trying to learn. Don't be naughty in my chat. Get away. So yeah.
Awesome.
But yeah, no, that makes sense. And you've got it all summarized there, so that's perfect. Thank you.
Yes,
Oh, there is a question. The key vault component will incur also a monthly cost.
Yep. So both, yes, I'll talk about that. But the key vault does incur a cost, but it's extremely minimal. So I was looking at some costs for all the stuff that I'd built for this, and every time I see the key vault listed, it has a little less than 1 cent per month or something listed. So it's like a barely registerable cost, essentially. It costs pretty much nothing.
Yeah. And Fernando said he tried using Service Principal to authenticate in a copy activity in a data pipeline from a SharePoint online list, but it didn't work. Invalid credentials. Don't know.
Okay. Yeah, look, I don't know in that specific scenario, but it is probably the main issue that you get trying to use service principals. I guess the main thing is it supported for authenticating SharePoint? You'd have to look at that as the first thing, and then usually I've caught myself out a lot too by just not having the secret and all of that stuff correct. That's often a thing too. Like if you're copy pasting and there's a space, or you copy paste the wrong thing in, but yeah.
It's just that someone said, is it supposed to work? So, yeah. Anyway, I will let you carry on. So this is brilliant, and it's all summarized there. So thank you.
Yep.
Microsoft Learn is brilliant, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So if you just in case you want to create a service principal, there's the documentation there that takes you through step by step creating the service principal, and then you just add your API permission, add it as contributor to your fabric capacity, and you'll see as we go through the demo, the key vault with the credentials, that's sort of an optional for security. Like you could do all of this without a key vault. It's just the key vault's a better option. You wouldn't pass a security review from like IT if you didn't use a key vault, probably.
Yeah.
All right. So this is sort of an overview of what we're going to build, or what I've built. We're going to talk through today. So we're going to create a really simple logic app that just has a schedule. So it says every day at 5:30 trigger. And what it's going to trigger is the API to resume the fabric capacity. So every day at 5:30 in the morning, it's going to resume the fabric capacity. And then within our fabric capacity, we'll build a pipeline that says every day at 5:35, run a notebook that calls some REST APIs. And this could be anything you want, this pipeline. This is just something I had. So it's got, some API calls and loads into a lakehouse, and then a stored procedure that pulls it into a warehouse, and then it triggers a semantic model to refresh, and then it pauses the capacity using a notebook. And we'll look at different options for this, but the semantic model that we're going to refresh in the pipeline actually sits not in the fabric capacity. So it sits in a shared capacity, a pro workspace, a normal workspace. So yeah, that's the basic process. You could get rid of these steps in the pipeline, and just to simplify it, we use a logic app, gets triggered at a time, resumes the fabric capacity. We do some kind of operations in fabric that we want to do, load some stuff into a warehouse or whatever. And then we pause the fabric capacity and whatever semantic model we've refreshed, because once the fabric capacity is paused, you can't do anything to it. You can't access a semantic model in it, even if you just want to live connect to an import model. When the capacity is paused, there's nothing you can do. So we have the semantic model sitting outside of Fabric in a shared workspace, so then users can use the reporting. So in a way, what we're doing here is we're taking our import semantic model that's just a regular pro kind of project that we're working on, and we're going, let's take all the ETL and things that we want to do in that semantic model and push it into a fabric capacity and store it in a warehouse and use those more robust ETL tools. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. It's one recommended route to split the workloads. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. All right. So let's have a quick look at this Logic app. It's really basic. You can do lots with Logic app, and one of those blogs that I put at the start from BI Insight has a more complex things. And obviously, you know, if you're good with this kind of stuff, there's heaps. But I just wanted to do something really simple, which is have a recurring trigger and trigger the capacity to start. So that's these two steps. And this is the configuration of this step, which is the hard one. But let's set it up from scratch, just so you can see how easy it is. So in Azure, you would go Logic Apps and add a Logic app. And you need to pick which subscription you're going to use, which is basically in Azure, your whatever resource group you're in would be in some kind of subscription. So you can see for me, there's only really a couple of options there. You need to give it a name. And then you'll want to pick the right region for you. It's important. So I'm Australia East. And also you want to click consumption here, because we want it to be something that we just pay for when we run it. And again, there is a cost to run a Logic app, but it's pretty much exactly the same as the Key Vault, in that it's like less than a cent every time you run it. So create your Logic app, pick your subscription and resource group, give it a name, choose your most closest region to you, and then choose consumption. And we'll just click create. And it takes a little while to deploy. It should be fairly quick. You can go to the resource now that it's been deployed. And so the best way to get started with these is underneath development tools in your Logic app. There's this Logic app designer. I don't know why mine's taking so long to load up. Yeah, so the Logic app designer here under development tools. It has an interface very similar to Power Automate, where you can just click different sort of actions and link them up in a kind of workflow. Francesco, is there a question from you? No. All right. So when you open up this Logic App Designer, the first thing that you have is add a trigger. So we'll click on add a trigger, and what we want to do first is get that scheduled trigger. So we'll search for recurrence, which is here under schedule. So we just add this action first, recurrence. And I'm going to say here 1 day and put in here 5:30, and it gives you a preview here. It says runs at 5:30 every day. So really simple. Enter and you have some options here. You could do it in hours and different things, but it's all just UI. Enter some details. You have something that's going to run on a schedule now. The next part we need to add is to trigger the API. So now I've got to remember where this is. I think it's called invoke resource. Yeah, so it's under Azure Resource Manager. There's an operation called invoke resource operation. And in here, we need to fill out some details. So these details you can find in Azure under the. This is my resource group, and you'll see here I've got a subscription ID, which is what we need for the first, and then the resource group is just the name of the resource group, which is this, and then we'll start pasting it in and see as we go. So the subscription ID is this, the resource group, subscription ID is this. Why isn't it like, you can just choose your subscription. You don't even have to paste the ID in. All right, so we'll choose the subscription. It'll bring it all up. You just choose. So the resource provider here, if you type in Fabric, it'll bring up Microsoft Fabric. The short resource ID is kind of like the endpoint of the API. That's the one thing where you need to paste something in, and it's going to be capacities and then your capacity name like this. The API version, if you remember when we looked at the actual API here, it had the version up the top, 23.11.01. So we can pop that in. API version. And then the action name, we'll put in, we want to resume. All right, so resume. So this is sort of pasted in the presentation as well if you need to refer back to it. But you can see it's mostly, apart from the short resource ID, but everything else is pretty kind of obvious. So now my Fabric capacity, if I go there, you'll see that it's paused. And if I give this app that we've just made a run, come back like this. Yeah, so if I run this, and I'll go back to the overview so we can see the run on it. Oh, it's got a couple failed ones there. Haven't really done anything, so interesting. What went wrong? Let's have a look. I must have filled something out wrong here. Let me open this one. You can see this one's filled out exactly the same, but must be something I did wrong in the other one. But if I click run on this, which is exactly the same as what we just built, it's got the recurrence for 5:30 every day, Brisbane time, our sponsorship, Sandbox, Fabric, all the same. If I run this one, I've got to close this first. You can see it succeeded, and if we check my Fabric capacity now, you can see that it's active. So this is how you can create a really simple logic app that just runs on a schedule and resumes Fabric capacity. So if you think about this solution, we go back to my diagram. It's kind of cool. Like we've got a schedule that resumes our Fabric capacity with a really simple logic app, but then we have to have a schedule. We have to schedule our Fabric pipeline to run after that to execute whatever we want, and then we've got to pause it again. What would be much nicer is if we could, within the logic app, tell it to turn the capacity on and then trigger the pipeline in Fabric so we don't have to have two different schedules going. So that'll be possible soon. It's might be possible now, but not easily. And the reason is we do have this other API to trigger pipelines in Fabric, which is great. But if you look at the documentation here, it doesn't support service principal authentication, which is annoying. And it will work though. So I'll show you another option with a logic app. So once they do enable service principal support for this trigger pipeline API, this will be a lot easier. So I have the same logic app I built here, where we have the schedule for every day, the resource operation to resume the API, and then I put this trigger pipeline step in here. And the main obstacle with getting this to work without a service principal is you can't get the token to, you can't authenticate with the service principal. So you need to sort of authenticate it with your own credentials, and it's really hard to get the token to work for the pipeline. But I've got an example here just to show you that it does work. I could trigger a pipeline. The way to do it is you can push F12 in your browser and open development tools. And this is, just for a bit of extra, I guess, trying to remember how I do this again now. Somewhere in here, I need to run something. Where did I do it? Create a live expression. That's right. So if I click here, type in Power BI token. Sorry, you actually need to be in Fabric to do this. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm going to get a token so that we can run the trigger pipeline. And this is not part of the solution. The solution, it's just to show you that once this solution will work, and once service principal's there, you'll be able to do it easily. But if I'm in Fabric and logged in, I can grab a token from here to authenticate with. It's just, we got to log in again. There we go. There we go, Power BI access token, copy string concept. So this just is giving me the token that I need. And it's referenced in some of those blogs as the way you can do. Or if you look up trigger Fabric pipeline API, you'll be able to find this method. There's a blog post here by Andy Leonard, which I should, I'll put the link in the chat actually if anyone's interested.
Thank you.
Because this is how definitely this solution would be improved by this. So if I can use this now in my logic app, I basically just need to put authorization, paste this code in the bearer, and this is forgot.
Yeah.
Let me grab it again.
But you know, it Kane, it all goes wrong for, not all go wrongs, but these are the type of things that we deal with on an everyday. So when you see, the way that you almost learn more.
Yes.
Anthony said that as well. You almost learn more because it never goes straight forward when you start to try and do it yourself.
Exactly. So yeah, if I run this now, because this trigger, so I put the authorization in there. Once we have, you'll see here that down the bottom there's an authentication section, and if you do that, you have this all these authentication options you can do here. You can, there's heaps of stuff you can do with the logic app to authenticate with the service principal, and it's very easy. If you try and look at doing this without a service principal and making it automated, because the tokens expire, it's like a nightmare. You got to jump through so many hoops.
Okay.
But so just to tell you that it will work once we have that, because it's in preview, the pipeline trigger. So once it does work, it should be as simple as what I've done here. It's just that you'll be able to pass something else as the token. If I run this, it will now trigger my pipeline. I don't want to do that just yet, but it will. It actually works and triggers the pipeline in Fabric. So you could set up a solution if you wanted to get a little bit more complex, where you have the trigger that goes, and then you resume the capacity here, and then you trigger your pipeline in Fabric.
Yeah.
And then in Fabric, we can actually then turn the capacity off. Okay. So now we can set up a pause operation in Fabric, and I'll go back to my, I'll show you what I've done in Fabric, because it's probably visually easier to understand. So this is this Fabric solution that I diagrammed before. We have like a warehouse, a lake house, some notebooks. So there's two notebooks. One is some Power BI REST API calls. So in this notebook, I'll give you a quick look. In this notebook, excuse me, basically we get those credentials from the Key Vault, get a token for some different things, have some functions written, and we have all these API calls to return details about workspaces and reports and all of that kind of stuff.
Jupyter Note is just so lovely, the notebooks where you can use the markdown to write and explain and highlight with headings, and it just makes it so much easier to understand, doesn't it?
You can document it all like this, so that's great. So then we have this notebook. We have another notebook I've created to pause the capacity, which I'll show you where I got that from. And then we have this pipeline. And basically the solution is, when it loads up.
I mean, this is where Python, I think, excels against Power Query, just in this reusability, documentation, and the functions. I absolutely love Power Query, but this is where you're seeing the right tool for the right job.
100%. Like I said, doing the API calls is, Stefan Ressel, he's got an amazing GitHub repository of how to call these REST APIs in Power Query, but it's not super easy for some things. So we have this pipeline. We use this notebook to call some REST APIs. That loads it into a lakehouse from the notebook, which is kind of like the landing or your bronze kind of, in a way. It just lands all this data, and then we have this stored procedure which is written to pick all that up and load it into a warehouse, and it does all the kind of, handles all the delta load, like does all inserts, updates, deletes, and that kind of stuff. Once it's all loaded into the warehouse, we trigger the semantic model to refresh, which, remember, is in the Pro workspace, and then we have a notebook that pauses the capacity. And so the notebook, Sorry,
so even though we're using Fabric to refresh the semantic model, because the semantic model is in Pro, we can still use it when the capacity is paused.
Exactly. Perfect. Right. Yeah. So, and these are easy to configure, these pipeline steps. You can see it's just UI based stuff. You just say, trigger this thing from here. The semantic model is sitting in a different workspace, a Pro workspace. And then same, these are all just pointing to objects and saying, just trigger these in a sequence. So let's have a look at the pause notebook as well. So this one is taken from Oliver Travers, the blog that I linked at the start. He had some code in a notebook, which I used as the base for this. And then I've just adapted it slightly to suit my needs. So this is something I think that's, even if you don't know Python, I think you can probably tackle something like this. I just grabbed his code. He originally had credentials stored in like a text file on his computer or something. So what I did, I just added this section to read the credentials from that key vault. So remember, we set the key vault up and we saved our service principal credentials there. This chunk of code just retrieves the credentials from the key vault. And then you can see here, we're just the same things that we used in our logic app to trigger the API. We've got our subscription ID, resource group, the capacity name, the API version, and then we have our API details. So this was just taken straight from his blog. The operation that you want to perform, suspend, and then we construct the URL to call for the API, which is just concatenating a bunch of stuff together. Grab a token using the Microsoft Authentication Library. And then this is just an if statement to say if the token's successful, print some different things. If it's not, say that it was failed. And so when we run this, it pauses the capacity. So if we look at, let's go back to my presentation so I know where I'm at and what we need to look at. Yes.
Yeah, so I've got some questions for you as well when you're ready.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just say this is, so where the base code was stolen from, this
He's
blog.
Brilliant,
and then,
Olivier, isn't he? Olivier.
He is, yeah. And then this is the notebook here. I've embedded it in the slide deck here. So you can just you can download it and you can just upload it straight into Fabric, and you could just replace the key vault details. You could replace your subscription IDs and stuff, and you can just use it. Questions?
I almost didn't want to ask if you were going to give us access to the notebook, because I thought there's probably been a lot of work putting it together, but so I'll read it. Fernando said, so you pause the capacity with Fabric notebooks but resume it with Logic apps in Azure.
Yes, correct.
Yes, that's great.
And there's other options too, which we'll just look at in a sec. I was happy to pause if there's any other questions.
I'm just checking. I know Oliver asked for one, but do you know, Kane, we had someone, we've never had it before. We had someone troll us. So the first part of the session, I was having to be, I couldn't keep quite, you just have to put it up again, Oliver. If you put it up again, it was about capacity and usage, I think. Yeah. Anyway, I'll let you carry on.
Sure. So there's another option as well. I like notebooks, probably like Sue. I like the way that it's all just laid out nice, and they're flexible. You really you can debug them. You can, see all the different outputs. You can run different bits of code, and they're quite, even, my Python's knowledge isn't great, but I find them quite user friendly. But there is a potentially better way to do this in a pipeline as well. So there's this blog here from Brett Cooper, which I've linked, which actually shows you how you can pause and resume a capacity using just an activity in a pipeline. So I'll quickly look at that as well. So I've done this one here, which is the web activity test, and I'll show you how that's configured. So this one, you need to first set up these parameters. So again, those things that we've set up in our notebook, we set up in the Logic app, the ID, the resource group, the capacity, the action you want to do. And then in the web activity, so this is, we just grab an activity and you just you basically need to create a web activity like this one, web.
Yeah.
And then in the details, you create a connection here.
Yeah.
Which is
the question was, someone was, can we ask Kane if he knows how much capacity use, how much CU is used by a capacity if no processing is actually happening?
Yeah, so it's it's done in time. So an F2 capacity gives you 7,200 compute units to use. The way that's calculated is there's 3,600 seconds in an hour, and because it's F2, you've got 2 hours, which is 7,200 compute units. But it's not that straightforward. So if you just leave your capacity on, you will use the full cost of the 7,200 compute units, but you also have the option with the bursting and smoothing that you can push beyond that, and then it'll be smoothed out. So even if you only have it on for an hour, you could potentially pay more than an hour because you've used. So there's a scenario that I'll look at a bit further on too. So but yeah, essentially, if you leave your F2 capacity on, you'll pay for the full capacity if you leave it on for the full month, basically.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. There were some other questions, but you've answered them, I think. So thank you, Christian, for putting them all in. Oliver said like leaving the heating on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just ticking over.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I'll let you carry on.
Yeah, I might not delve fully into this myself, but it's described brilliantly in the blog here. It tells you exactly what you need to do, and there's some other steps there. But it basically what you get in the end is this, and I tested this one out. Works. It's not that hard to set up. You have a bunch of stuff you've got to paste in here. This all gets pasted into the relative URL. It's just concatenating all those different fields, and there's a connection that you configure. Essentially, it's doing the same thing we've been doing all along. You're putting together a URL with subscription IDs and everything in it to, and with an action in it to say suspend or resume the API. And the reason that using a web activity would be good, and just using it in your pipeline, is you're not going to spin up a Spark pool in order to pause your capacity. It might even be faster as well because of that. So if if you're executing a notebook to pause the capacity, it's got to spin up some kind of Spark pool, which might already be there from what you've been. I think every notebook is a different Spark pool as well. So in terms of if you're really trying to nail down cost, perhaps just a web activity like this is going to be the best way, most efficient way to do it in a pipeline. So that's another option. Okay. So I think we're almost getting to the end here. There's a bit of, So this is kind of my sort of final thoughts and some probably discussion around some of the things we've been talking about. But so there's a lot of ways that you can, I showed you this simple solution, which is use a logic app to turn your capacity on, run your pipeline, use the notebook to turn it off. You can see, though, we've got notebooks, there's logic apps, we've got the web activity in the pipeline, there's the pipeline API that's coming. There's lots of different things you could do with this. This scenario I showed you is just one where we're sort of saying, let's get rid of all that ETL out of Power BI and stick it in Fabric and keep Power BI nice and lean. And that's great if your end result of your solution is just Power BI reports and people using Power BI reports. But once your capacity is turned off, obviously you don't have access to all the Fabric functionality. So if you've got people that want to, run SQL queries or use direct query or manually refresh the data set, it's not gonna work. So in this solution, even though the semantic model is in a shared capacity, all the data is imported and you can run all your reporting, but they can't do a manual refresh because Fabric capacity is turned off, right? So it's something where you'd run it once a day, and then once it's run, that's it. You're stuck with your reporting, and that's it. Or you run it however many times you do, but once it's done, it's done. But there are other sort of scenarios we could look at. So a reserved capacity, as opposed to a PayYG capacity, gives you a 41% discount. So even if you just limited your PayYG capacity to daytime hours or business hours, you might already be winning. Certainly you would be if you're within those CU limits, right? If you just said, well, we're just going to do 9 to 5 capacity on. It does depend on your CU usage, though. Like I said, if you do 24 hours worth of CU consumption in those business hours that you've got it turned on, you're still going to get charged for that, right? So it's not a given, but it's something you can look at. You could say, well, for a business, when are you using Power BI? When are you performing the stuff that you need to use? And what are the sorts of things that you're doing? And if they're just kind of doing basic stuff like running SQL queries and doing some manual refreshes, and they might want to have a look at their data and just do basic stuff, you might be winning if you just, turn it on in business hours. Another thing you could do for a more I guess a bit more complex solution is you might feel like, well, we need fabric on all the time. We need users to be able to use all the fabric capabilities no matter what. But all they're doing is really basic stuff like basic analysis and simple things. All we need is an F2 for what they need to do. But the data they have is huge, and we need to do this massive import or huge ETL operation. So you could look at whether it's cost effective to have a higher F2 SKU that you just turn on to do some huge operation and then turn off again. And then for day-to-day business as usual, you just run the F2. The benefit of that too is if you've got a capacity that's running all the time, you can just use notebooks or easier methods than the Logic app. You wouldn't need a Logic app. If you've got a capacity, you can just run things to turn the other capacity on and off. So that's another option. The other thing is it can be a good way to introduce people to Fabric. So, Fabric's new, people are really interested in it. There's lots of projects happening, but people are often unsure whether they want to dive in head first and say, build me a whole giant thing in Fabric, I'm ready to go. Often they want to do like a proof of concept or something like that. So an assessment or a small toe in the waters kind of thing. So this can be a good stepping stone for customers where you say, look, why don't we build something and you use it, and then we take it from there.
Get an idea for the cost and the complexity and the usage, and whether people will actually use it as well.
And that's my kind of next point really, is the cost.
Yeah.
So cost is tricky, like we spoke about before. The best thing you can do, in my opinion, to be able to give customers a cost estimate is have your own F2 capacity so that you can run something in it and get an idea of the CU usage. Gilbert, one of my fellow Queenslanders in Australia, has got a brilliant blog there on how CUs and everything, how to calculate costs. So that can help. Sometimes it is, though, a matter of just, well, let's start with an F2 and see how we go.
That's my plan. Is I've set up an F2, so I'm going to now work through this and then have a play with it and see what the actual costing's like before I've got a couple of clients that I think it would be suitable for. But you don't want to sort of recommend anything until you're a little bit more knowledgeable. Jake's got a quick question. Does turning off the capacity kill the operations in a mid-run? So I guess it would, wouldn't it? Because you just can't access it.
And you'll actually, one thing I forgot to mention that's a little annoying is your pipeline. If you run the pipeline, you run the notebook to turn the capacity off, it'll always say that the pipeline's failed. But when you look at the pipeline, it'll say every step was successful, but it'll say that the last step, turning the capacity off, failed, but it didn't. It's just that the capacity turned off and it wasn't able to report back like a success thing because the capacity was off. So it'll say the last step failed, but it doesn't. Just in terms of cost too, this solution that I showed you where we populate, I think it's about 10 tables with information from the tenant. I've got it linked to my own Fabric capacity, so it was quite small results. But to run that Fabric notebook, which takes about 5 minutes, run the stored procedure, store it in the warehouse, refresh the semantic model and turn off the capacity, is about $1.20 Australian a run is what it looks like.
Yeah. So you're talking, if you did that every day, that's less than 30 quid, isn't it?
And that's including all the costs of the Key Vault and the service principal, anything in Azure that we've set up, plus running the pipeline and everything. So you could see that with that solution, we've got, if we had an existing semantic model, say from a business, and refreshes are slow and timing out, and it's a bit of a monster, and we want to take all that out of Power BI, and all they want to do is use their Power BI reports, it's like we could add ETL and storing stuff in a warehouse and stuff for, $1.20 a day if they were only refreshing once a day sort of thing.
Yeah. And it's so quick, isn't it? So what have you found with the speed of F2? When I say it's so quick,
it's so my understanding with Fabric is that, and the different SKUs, is there are some memory limits around different things, but in terms of like actual raw compute power, when you spin up a capacity, there's no set of servers over in the corner of a room that belong to you. There's one big pool of compute that you're using, whether you're F2 or F64. And the skew level is basically just a line saying, I don't want to be billed above this line.
Yeah.
So you're using things and it's hitting the line, and you can go above the line and it'll smooth it out. But if you're consistently going above the line and it's smoothing out and you get over that line, it's going to throttle you and say, you don't want to be charged more than this, so we're going to slow you down. But in terms of performance, no difference whether you're using an F2 or an F64, apart from if you get into the nitty gritty, there's some little memory size limits around the place. In terms of pure speed, though, no difference.
Okay, brilliant. Jude's asked a question: is there a way to offload the client insights to a cheaper platform like Power BI Pro, and then the consumers can use the Pro platform from there 24/7? So Fabric's used only for the ETL, only in the L. In the end, I think that's what you're saying, isn't it?
That's basically the solution. Yeah, if we go back, it's essentially that. If I go back to the thing, so all of our ETL was done in the F2 capacity, and then the capacity's turned off, and then the pipeline refreshes our model, which sits in the Pro workspace, so they can use those Pro reports, all day long and all good. The only caveat is, again, like I said, if they wanted to then go and manually refresh this model again, it's not going to work because everything's turned off.
Paused.
And like, if they want to go look at the source and say, well, let me go back into the warehouse and have a look, they can't, because pause. They could obviously go back in and manually turn the capacity on, have a look at stuff, turn it off.
Yeah. But it's actually, it doesn't seem, it seems quite a reasonable price. Who's it? Pallavi said, should we keep the semantic layer capacity separate from ETL? It's good practice to keep it separate.
So I'd say it depends on the solution. There are some probably solutions where it makes sense to put like a dev environment in a different capacity to like a production environment. Like you might want to limit your costs and things like that. But in terms of semantic layer, I wouldn't say it's a good practice. I would say, but this is my understanding. Obviously, everything depends, and there's lots of different thinking around it. But I would say that it's simpler just to keep everything in the same capacity. We've separated out the semantic layer into a different capacity here purely for cost benefits and saying we don't want to pay for our Fabric capacity all the time. We just want to separate our semantic layer so that we can pay a tiny bit for our ETL and all that and have a really fast, slim sort of Pro workspace that does everything.
Yeah, because if you pause it, you just literally don't see anything that's in that capacity. So that's the reason why you literally don't see anything. So by having your shared capacity, a Pro workspace with your model in it, it means it will still function.
Yeah, I was just thinking, you can probably set something up here with Power Automate to turn capacities on. So you could probably give users a really simple way to enable the capacity from a Power BI report. You could do a solution like this and then say, if you do want to do a refresh or something, just open your report, hit resume capacity with your Power Automate button.
Yeah.
It'll turn your capacity on. You can hit refresh or go look at the warehouse or whatever, and then just remember to turn it off.
Yeah, I think it's that, isn't it? It's a billing thing. Just remember to turn it off.
Remembering to turn it off. Yeah.
It was one of the questions that someone mentioned and said is the Logic apps more advanced version of Power Automate?
Yeah, in a way, very similar kind of setup to how you build them. But I think, there's a lot more advanced kind of functionalities in there. In terms of the objects, it'd be different than you find in Power Automate. I think they're for different purposes. I think Logic apps are for performing cloud operations in Azure.
Yeah.
And I think, Power Automate's for automating.
Yeah. Question for Fernando. What do you think of F2 capacity users out in the wild? Who will use it? Who will be the administrator if it's supposed to be for small and medium-sized enterprises?
Out in the wild.
It'd be people like me who support. I tend to, customers that have got enough data that they need to do something useful, but they're too small to have a dedicated data team. So
Exactly.
and it's if you need to have someone to manage your data if you've got a successful business and you want to move it forward. It's a bit like having an accountant nowadays, I think. So yeah.
I think there's a huge opportunity with small businesses for lower FSQs. Like
Mm,
we said at the start, they don't
yeah.
they don't have a data team. They don't have
No.
the funds to spin up
Yeah.
a more sophisticated modern analytics platform. The fact that Fabric's everything's all in one
Yeah.
spot. And when
Yeah.
you look in Azure, it's pretty simple. There's just a
Yeah.
capacity and you can pause and resume it. I
Yeah.
think that,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a specific use case I came across that kind of inspired this, which I think is common. And it's exactly this, is that I had this company that they were connecting to a financial ERP system.
Mm,
They had running their business completely, all their operations and sales and everything off sets of reports that were built from a central semantic model that was just kind of a Frankenstein monster
mm,
that had been built over time, and it was slow to refresh. Refreshes were failing because
mm,
there's so much transformation done to support the reporting and get it
mm,
into the right shape. And
mm.
they would never say, well, let's build a data warehouse. They don't have any
No.
IT. They didn't have an IT department, but they were
No.
running their whole operation and a pretty good sized business just off these Power BI reports. And for
Mm,
someone like them, you could say, look, for a very low cost, you can fix all of your problems. Potentially, even if you just like with the reserved F2, have um, this infrastructure that is scalable for you, that if you do start wanting to use it, it's all there, all the capabilities. Have your data visible in a warehouse, all of these
mm,
benefits of,
mm. Pull
Fabric. I
everything
think,
together from all these different resources, combine them. Yeah. I think this is setting up the F2. I've got one customer that's exactly the same. They're starting to change their software. We've had this, everything's been in data flows because,
yep.
CSVs, extracts. I thought data mart might be one of the options, but that seems to have gone quiet. And I thought, oh, Fabric,
Mm,
great, but then the costing. But now with being able to use an F2 and understanding that actually you're talking probably maybe under 50 quid a month.
yep.
So, it becomes feasible then to actually, I've got my DP600, so I'm quite happy to, and most of us, if we're a bit obsessed with Power BI, then we want to learn it, don't we? We want to see how it works. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I've like you suggested, I've set up an F2 and I can play with this and play with it and monitor the costs and then
Yeah, I really
see.
think just I think enabling in business hours is a good solution for a
Yeah,
lot of people.
yeah,
No restrictions, even if you don't have the separate pro workspace or anything. That even just if you're using Fabric for a solution and that's it.
yeah,
Most people don't need to use it from five between whatever time, 6 p.m. and
yeah,
7 a.m. in the morning or something.
yeah,
And if you might be saving a lot of cost, because if you're within your kind of CU limits during the day,
yeah,
then you're
yeah,
basically halving your cost already.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, Cameron said, "What's the current situation with data marts?" Um, they've just gone really quiet. I've got a data mart that's just sat there, but there is just there's no, I don't know, any drive to use them or invest in them. So I've got all my data flows going into a data mart, and I spent time understanding how they worked. But then Fabric's come along and just sort of seems to have wiped them all out of the way. Did you ever use data marts, Kane? Did you, Cameron? Can't remember what the
No,
question is. Yeah.
I never used them. I felt like they were a stepping stone, it's like they developed them as part of Fabric or something and decided to release them early or something, because I don't really understand what the functionality is that they have that you don't have in Fabric.
Yeah, they came out before Fabric was announced. And so the
Yeah.
ability was supposed to enable you to have incremental refresh by having your data going into the equivalent of a database so that you could then set up. So I thought
Yeah.
for all my data flows, it would be brilliant. It would set up the incremental refresh. But then Fabric came in, you thought, well, why would I do that? Because I can pop it into,
Yeah.
you know, pop it into
I
one lake or
understand.
then, set up a database or.
Yeah, I always thought they were supposed to be, citizen warehouses and make
Yeah,
things
yeah,
simple, remove all the management overhead and a way
yeah,
to shortcut around IT so
yeah,
that you don't have to get things provisioned. But
yeah,
yeah, now I feel like, yeah, I don't see the benefit. Maybe there's probably a use case still there where you don't want to set up, because Fabric still requires you to set up a Fabric
yeah,
capacity in Azure,
yeah,
or it gets set up in Azure, and then there's IT oversight and all of that stuff. Whereas I
yeah,
believe data marts you can do purely in the Power BI
yeah,
service. So
yeah,
maybe it's still a thing there where it's like business users can spin up their own warehouses basically.
yeah. Cameron said you were told to stop using them. Who told you, Cameron? Was that a business decision or a Microsoft decision? Yeah, it was marketed as self-service, but
Mm.
yeah. No, Christian said even PBI desktop as we know it might go away. Have you seen Greg Decler's video? No, I haven't. I've been busy working, Christian. Working. Yeah, no, I haven't.
Yeah, I
Okay,
think
yeah.
Marco's argued that Power BI desktop will never go away, but they always seem to be at odds, Marco and Greg.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. Who knows?
I
I
don't I
wouldn't have
don't think
thought
it. I know
so.
that they're really trying to bring feature parity and
Yeah.
to be honest, I find some of the things you can do in the service now really useful. Like having
Yeah,
the
yeah,
live.
yeah.
They
Yeah.
just released the live query view for the service, DAX query view. That's
Yeah.
super handy and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think that um, they'll never achieve the performance you get in Power BI desktop if you got to do serious stuff with big chunks of data and stuff. Then
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's it's one of these things you think, all right, just see what happens. But yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's becoming more and more easier to use cloud-based. And Fernando's words, data marts is like Charticulator, proof of concept and move on.
I think you're right.
I think so too. I think so. Um, Brilliant, Kane. Thank you so much.